Einen wunderschönen guten Morgen aus Bukarest wünsche ich, Gerd Bommer, der Wirtschaftsdelegierte am Außenwirtschaftscenter Bukarest. Good morning, bună dimineața from Bucharest in Romania here. We're here for the webinar for European Union subsidies for Romania, new subsidies in the new financial plan for the next 7 years, and new subsidies that are coming out right now. I'm very happy to be able to run this webinar today in English language. We run it in English language as we have also many viewers from Romania here, from our Austrian subsidiaries here in Romania. I want to greet everyone again in Austria and especially in Vienna. And for this, we would say that we feel with you, Vienna, and of course we think of you. And we think that also for a webinar, it is kind of appropriate to have a short minute of silence for all the victims in Vienna, and we're thinking about them. So let us start with a short overview about Romania right now. As in COVID times, we have a very specific situation. And I would like to give you some news that for some of you might maybe be surprising. But let's start with the Austrian position in Romania. Austria is a market leader in about 10 industries here in Romania. The Austrian companies are market leader in the 10 industries, especially in resources, oil and gas, forestry, wood, mineral resources, in agriculture, also in sugar, a very high market share in sugar. In construction and construction materials, we're #1 in the market with our Austrian companies. In real estate and real estate development, we're very big players in Romania, as well as in banking, insurances, and logistics, as everybody knows. But Romania, the economy. So what was the economy like? We had GDP growth in the last few years that was always the highest or within the highest in the European Union. It was between 4 and 7%. And to the surprise of everyone, the estimates for 2020 are going higher and higher. They're still negative, but one has to say that in the first half of 2020, the negative GDPR impact was only 3.9%. So maybe we will have to see, or we will see a revision of the 4.9% that are predicted for the GDP growth in 2020, and we'll see an upward revision that will happen now. According to our source, and the numbers for someone who knows the sources, they are not in alignment. Our source is Economist Intelligence Unit says 6% minus, but all the forecasts are already revised, and they're going below -5% already, 4.9%, 4.7% by World Bank, by IMF, and different other institutions. For the Austrian exports and imports, we had a phenomenal year in 2018 with a very, very high growth. Then, of course, in 2019, we had a bit of a stagnation with a 2% minus in the exports. But in 2020, in the first half year of 2020, we see a minus of about 16, 17% so far, which, of course, is explainable with the lockdown that we had in Austria, the lockdown that we had here in Romania. But we hope that we see kind of catching up again in the second half, but especially in 2021 to see something more. 2021 will give us also a big chance for growth here in Romania. We assume that there's going to be a base effect and that there's also going to be kind of growth, which is driven by different segments. Let's get into that later on. We have about 9 billion euros of Austrian foreign direct investment here, depending on the Austrian or the Romanian statistics. And we have over 3,700 companies in Romania registered in the trade register with Austrian shareholdings so far, with over 100,000 direct employees. Well, we were always amongst the highest in the first half of 2020. As I said, Romania had a negative growth of 3.9% or a decrease of 3.9%. Which will be most likely, as we see right now, the revenue stream of the budget of the government, and as we see right now in the first figures coming in, which might be a healthy growth even in the second half of 2020. We will see that. But in 2021, as I said, we're expecting a rebound of Romania. We're expecting one of the strongest developments in the European Union in those countries. Well, of course, one part is the base effect. The base effect will be 2 to 3%, maybe even. And then we have two other factors which are very, very important for the development in 2020. which will be the strong foreign direct investments and industry investments that are being done right now. Romania had the strongest investment development in the first half of 2020 in all of the European Union, and also in the infrastructure investments. There is an enormous push of the infrastructure investments in Romania right now in 2020 and also for 2021, and we already see it coming with all the projects and the tenders being out there. And we already saw in the first half of 2020 a 5% growth in the construction sector and no decrease in the construction sector. So we will see that this development is going to be stronger and going to go on in 2020 and 2021. Yeah, the former socialist government increased spending, endangered the financial stability of Romania and spiked inflation. The only thing that remains from that time, since we have a new government since November of 2019, which reversed this path, is that the currency tends to depreciate. The currency right now is at 488, 489. When I started here in Romania in 2016, it was still at 444, 446. And we will see this depreciation to go on partially. The new government reversed this path completely. We also see that the revision of this path is being appreciated because the international rating agencies, Moody's, Standard and Poor's, Fitch, they would have downgraded Romania actually below investment grade in 2020, by the end of 2020, if this path was not revised. So this path was revised. All the rating agencies, all three of them by now, keep the rating of Romania, and we'll keep watching what the outlook is going to be. And the new government said that they're going to keep on going this path of economic growth, of investments, and so on. One thing that we have on this way within the next few months is the parliamentary elections, which are going to be on the 6th of December 2020. Right now, the current government is in the lead in all the polls. We will see after the election, which is today, and also very important in the United States, we will also see what the elections will bring to us. But as it seems, the polls are extremely stable, and it seems that the government that is working right now, the acting government, might be the government also after the 6th of December. Well, unemployment is extremely low. This is something that I always said in the last years before the COVID crisis as well, and that we had full employment in some regions before the COVID time. But one thing that we have to say is that the employment right now, the employment figures, not the unemployment figures, okay? The unemployment figures are also higher than in the beginning of 2020, but the employment figures are higher than in January 2020. So the development of Romania is a very healthy one, actually, compared to all the other European Union countries. Yeah, but what do we have in Romania? What was the past? What were we accompanied with? And that were the problems with the absorption rate of the European Union funds, which came up to 82% in the last financing period, but then jumped up to 94% all of a sudden. Maybe Johannes Becker will also go into that a bit. But we hope that the problems with the absorption rate will be fully remedied, and the new government will open up the funds in a way that they can actually be accessed fully by all the companies and by all the projects that Romania needs so dearly. Yeah, the Austrian economy continues to be a major investor in Romania, but the statistics have been changed. So the base of the statistics has been changed because the European Union directive on the ultimate beneficiary came out and has been implemented in Romania as well. And therefore, the Netherlands dropped from position 1 to position 5 as an investor, and Germany advanced to position 1, and Austria advanced to position 2, with the initial investment figures that are being reported. We have to say that Austria has, the Austrian subsidiaries in Romania have extremely strong reinvestments. In terms of counting in the reinvestments, the Austrian economy would definitely be the biggest one here in Romania. The Austrian investors would be definitely the biggest ones in Romania. So we are in position 2 in the statistics now, up from 3. Bilateral trade, we saw that the last financial crisis had a huge dip. We also see in those figures that the dip is much more massive and deep than actually right now from the figures that we see right now in the first half of 2020. We hope that this trend can be continued. We had a huge growth in 2018, and that huge growth obviously also led a bit to stagnation in 2019. As I said, first half of 2020 was a minus of about 16-17% in the Austrian exports. We will see if we catch up in the second half of 2020, but we're very positive again for 2021, not only for the Romanian economic development, but also for the Austrian exports. Yeah, we added some slides for you, which I'm not going to talk about right now. We have kind of a SWOT analysis here, and we do have important intercultural aspects, which I'm not going to talk about right now because the time does not permit it. In that sense, I just want to stop with one thing that we actually have to talk about. Romania changed the list of the yellow countries, as it's called. Those are the risk lists with an epidemiological risk, which means that Austria is on that list since today again, or coming on the list today in the evening again. The implementation is going to be today about 10 p.m. And from that moment on, from Austria, you cannot travel any more freely into Romania, but you will be obliged to either go into quarantine for 14 days, which means that on the 8th day of quarantine, you can take a COVID test, a PCR test, which is a biomolecular test. If that is negative, you can leave the quarantine on the 10th day. Otherwise, you have to keep the quarantine for 14 days. But there is numerous exemptions right now. And the exemptions are, for instance, for installation works, for persons coming to the subsidiaries, I don't know, the supervisory boards, the managing directors, technical staff that install something in the subsidiaries here. They're all exempt in a certain way. You can come into Romania from Austria for 72 hours maximum if you present a negative PCR test, which is not older than 48 hours. That was pretty quick right now. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to send us an email. And I'm more than happy to greet now our speaker, Johannes Becker, who is a partner and consultant at TPA Romania. And Johannes Becker will give you now the presentation of the European Union funds. Very happy to have you here, Johannes. Please take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerd, and thank you to all of you to join us on this very difficult morning. I'm going to talk about the EU funds in Romania for the next period, and I've structured it like this. At the beginning, I will talk a little bit about what the concepts and the policies of the European Union are for the next period, 2021-2027. Then about what kind of funds Romania can receive and what kind of programs have already been sketched, because we have the first drafts already of several programs. And then in the end, I will talk a little bit about the programs, EU funds, national funds that you still can apply for in 2020 or in the first period after 2021. Now, in the very beginning, let me start with a little spoiler. You will see this graph also a little bit later. So I'm not going to go into detail now, but what you can see here is kind of a wake-up call. So the red line you see here on the left side from 2014 to 2020, these are the EU funds that Romania actually used on average during the period 2014-2020. That's approximately 1.7 billion euro per year. And what you see, this huge mountain beginning with 2021, this is the EU funds that Romania can receive starting from 2021. And you see, this is a huge opportunity, but it's also an issue, because until now, also it would have been possible to use more EU funds, but for several reasons, the Romanian authorities were not able to do so. So now we have, starting from next year, we have suddenly more than 10 times the EU funds at our possibility that we had until now. About the general EU budget, there have been many discussions in the past months and figures have changed quite frequently, but it seems to be like this. There's the regular EU budget for 2021-2027, where Romania can receive in total the EU as a total has a budget of 1,074 billion euro at this position. Then there were many discussions about the Green Deal, and there's this figure of 1,000 billion euro that was announced earlier this year for the period 2021 to 2030. Then we have, of course, the Recovery and Resilience Plan that's now called a little bit more nicely, not so negatively, the Next Generation EU, for which there are foreseen directly for the countries 672.5 billion euro. And we have the Just Transition Funds for some energy projects with 100 billion euro, and we have the SURE program with 100 billion euro. never in its history had the European Union so many funds and possibility for all kinds of projects and programs. So let's dig a little bit deeper now. And what we see actually, I would say, in the basic outline of the EU funds for the entire European Union for the next year, I would say it's a change of paradigm. It's not so much anymore in the direction of growth and more of the same, but suddenly we have two topics that are dominant, and you will see during the entire presentation these two topics pop up again and again. And the first one is green transition, and the second one is digital transition and productivity. I'm going to talk now, with the help of the next slides, over several EU policies. It's a little bit difficult to put them in a certain hierarchy. There are more or less several layers of policies that are put one above the other. And all the countries of the European Union basically have to pick the ideas for their EU funds programs from these policy principles and policy objectives. Let's start with the green transition that I've just mentioned. So there's the overall target of the European Union to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 55% until 2020. That's a huge target. And they have identified 5 priority areas where they want to finance projects to achieve this target. First of all, of course, renewable energy, specifically mentioned also hydrogen and new applications of hydrogen and of production of hydrogen. And a huge topic, of course, is energy efficiency in buildings. Why is energy efficiency in buildings such a huge topic? Well, it's very simple, because about 40% of all the energy used in the European Union is used for heating and cooling or bringing light into buildings. So this is actually an area where a lot can be improved within a relatively short time. Another topic that is very present in public discussions all the time is sustainable mobility. Circular economy maybe is not as present, but I think it will become a more and more important topic for the future. Biodiversity is a topic where the European Union in the past did not very much look into, with the exception of defining Natura 2000 sites and so on. But now they will provide a lot more funds for this area. And social fairness as well. Until the last funding period, the European Union has seen itself almost entirely as an economic European Union. And suddenly they say that social fairness, and especially in connection with the digital revolution, in connection, of course, also now with what is happening with the COVID virus, and in connection, of course, with the greening of the economy. So social fairness becomes an ever more important topic, and there will be a lot of funds also for this area. If you're looking in the area of, or the concept of digital transition and productivity, then we have identified basically 3 main areas they want to finance. One is connectivity, which starts, of course, with fast internet connections, 5G connections, and so on. But it also means the access of persons, of physical persons, of companies to the digital world itself. This also means that there will be trainings for digital skills of persons, of companies, of people employed by companies, but also of private persons, also of children, just to prepare everybody a little bit better for the more digital world that we're going to move into. And very interesting, there will be a lot of funds for deploying cutting-edge digital capacities. So this means areas like blockchain or artificial intelligence. And this means there will be a lot of funds available for research projects in these areas. Out of these areas, Romania has defined, not Romania, the European Union has defined 5 basic principles and objectives that have to be fulfilled by each of the countries when they're using their EU funds. First of them is the smarter Europe. So this means innovative and smart economic transformation. And you see here I wrote 35%. 35% means that countries that are on the same development level like Romania have to use 35% of all EU funds for projects that are related to this development of a smarter Europe. And if you go one line down, you will see a green and low carbon Europe with some of the topics I've mentioned before, 30%, which means that 30% of all EU funds that Romania receives will have to be used for this topic and for the family of these topics of greener, low carbon Europe. So this means that we have in total about 2/3 of EU funds that are to be used for these 2 specific areas, which means then, of course, that for many other areas that have been funded in the past, partly with very large amounts of money, and that do not fit into these two areas, it will be very difficult to still spend EU funds. The other 3 points are a more connected Europe, as I said already, a more social Europe, and a Europe closer to citizens, which means that it will be a little bit easier also for local initiatives, maybe also for NGOs on a local level to receive funds for their projects than it has been until now. There is another layer, not to end here, regarding EU policy objectives. So we said, what kind of projects, more precisely, what kind of projects do we want to see funded with these funds from the period 2021-2027? And they came up with the following points: investments in infrastructure, especially investments in TEN-T projects. These have been eligible also in the past, but there is still, especially in the less developed countries, a huge necessity to invest into these areas. Investments in access to services, so not only production, but also services. Productive investment in SMEs. Again, what is an SME? Because this question is coming up again and again. So an SME is any company that has not more than 249 employees as a group, on group level. So we have to calculate all the sister and brother and daughter companies. And if it has also less than 250 employees, but has more than 50 million euro yearly revenues and more than 43 million euro assets, then it also has to be considered a large company. This definition is a little bit unclear occasionally, but we have been working with this definition for many years now, and we have learned how to calculate it for each company. What generally is also eligible, and this is, I think, mostly important for companies, is equipment, software, and any kind of intangible assets, which were eligible also in the previous period. Also information, communication studies, etc., and investments in any kind of environmental facilities or improvements of a production site or whatever. On the other hand, of course, there's a list of what cannot be financed, and this is, I think, also a very important list, because there have been many rumors and expectations in the past of what would be eligible in this new funding period, and the European Commission said very clearly what we do not want to be financed. So first point on the list, you see direct payment to large companies. What does this mean? This means if a large company, as a group, a large company wants to invest in Romania by constructing a new factory or something like this, this will not be eligible with EU funds. If you have a little bit patience, then by the end of the presentation, you will hear there are nonetheless 2 programs in Romania from national funds where this kind of investments are eligible. So not all hope is lost. And apart from this, large companies are eligible also for many of the other activities that are foreseen for the next period. Another point that is not eligible is disposal of waste in landfills, and this is actually a huge topic for Romania. Romania has had the opportunity to receive a lot of EU funds already from 2007 for landfills, ecological landfills. The projects were not very successful, actually. Many of them are still not finished, and if they will not be finished by the end of 2023, this is it. Romania will not receive any further funds for this kind of project. Also, facilities for the treatment of residual waste are not eligible anymore. There has to be defined a little bit more precise what this means, because on the other hand, recycling, for instance, is eligible. Airport infrastructure, with a few exceptions, will not be eligible anymore. Also, anything that has to do with production, processing, distribution, etc., of fossil fuels. Broadband infrastructure in areas where it is already existing is not eligible anymore, and also rolling stock for rail transport, with a very few exceptions, is not eligible anymore. This is bad news for Romania, because if we look at the status and the situation of the rolling stock of Romanian railroads, there would be a huge need for further investments. This was about generally the European Union. Now let's talk about Romania. What can Romania actually receive over this next period? So first of all, out of the regular budget, Romania can receive 46.6 billion euro. This is a lot more than we had in the period 2014-2020. Then we have, of course, the funds from the Recovery and Resilience, the Next Generation EU budget. And it was just these days, it was decided Romania will receive 30.4 billion euro for this, from this fund. Then we have the SURE program Romania can receive a loan of 4.1 billion euro. SURE program is something a little bit different. The SURE program was created in connection with the crisis for countries that allow for Kurzarbeit, this reduction of hours that people are working in a company. This money is more or less assistance from the European Union to the liquidity of the member states, and it will have to be paid back in the coming years. So this is not a grant that Romania can receive. And then we still have almost 3/4 of EU funds from the period 2014-2020 that have not yet been spent. And you see here also the Green Deal, and you see immediately there's no figure beside it. That's for a reason, because the budget of the Green Deal is mostly included in the other programs. There are only a few smaller programs where the Green Deal will finance projects in the entire European Union, but most of this 1,000 billion euro that we're talking about are actually covered by the other budgets. Now we come again to this graph that I've shown you in the beginning. And let's get a little bit more in detail. So the red colors are the EU funds from 2014 to 2020, and you see that a big part of these funds are still not used. They have to be used by the end of 2023. So Romania still has some time to actually spend these funds for projects they have already started. But it's a lot of money, and these 3 years are very short. Then you see the green color. The green color is the regular budget 2021-2027. Now I have calculated this for the 7 years period. This is a little bit overly optimistic, I'm sure, because as you've seen, Romania can spend also the funds from 2014 to 2020 for a longer period. And of course, it will also be possible to spend the funds 2020-27 for most likely another 2 years. Yeah, but still, just that you see the dimension, how much money it is actually there. I put it like this. And the blue one is the Next Generation EU, this Recovery and Resilience Fund, that actually should be spent very quickly. So I've put it in 4 years. We will see what the real period will be. But you see, again, a lot of money available here. And the SURE fund is the, I hope you see it as a green colored box on top of it. That's relatively small. And you see, this starts already in 2020 because Romania can already use 2020 to spend this money for the Kurzarbeit, where the legislation has been actually approved earlier this year. Very shortly about the Romanian Recovery and Resilience Plan. Romania, like all the other EU countries, has a deadline. Romania has to present the programs in detail until the end of April next year. This means that by then, Romania has to say very clearly what they want to do with this 30.4 billion euro in this period of about 4 years. The contracts for the projects have to be signed until the end of 2022. That's the current situation. Now, Romania does not yet have an official draft. They said they will present an official draft most likely this week or maybe next week. But in some older documents, we have found a few points that show a direction. This is still not final, of course, this can change, but there's some interesting points. So I think very interesting is that they're talking about using approximately 5.5 billion, as I've understood, for irrigation systems for agriculture. It's also a huge need in Romania, and money that can be spent relatively quickly, I guess. Then we have an urgent point that's a district heating system. So why is it urgent? Well, in Bukarest at this moment, there are several 10,000 households that for the last 2 weeks didn't have any warm water and any heating, and the winter is coming. And this is because the system is breaking down all the time. So this needs a major refurbishment, and the situation in many other big cities is not much better than it is in Bucharest. Public hospitals, of course, in connection with the COVID crisis. So there is already money spent, actually. So much of what is being invested now in relation with the COVID crisis actually is already being used from this Recovery and Resilience Plan. It can be paid back later to the Romanian government. Public research institutes they put in here that have been quite dried out of funds in the past, and some drinking water and wastewater networks, which is an ongoing issue in Romania that there's still a lot of investment pending. Let's talk now on the next few slides a little bit more in detail about what is going to be done with this 46 billion euro that Romania receives from the regular budget. And there we are, for the time being, I would say, relatively advanced already, especially if I compare on the progress that we had in the period 2014-2020. I think at the moment the government is moving faster than they were moving then. which is a good sign. So basically, these are the chapters. I also wrote the amounts of money that can be received for each of these areas. The last one is rural development without a figure yet. So basically, it's the entire rest. The 46 billion euro is for rural development. That means for agricultural and for rural projects. Let's go through the list one by one. Let's start with the regional programs. So as you can see here on this little graph on the right-hand side, Romania is divided in 8 regions, and each of these 8 regions actually makes its own program and receives a certain portion of this fund. The focus, of course, differs a little bit from region to region, depending on their necessities. But in large, the following issues or the following topics and projects will be financeable under these programs. First of all, that's why I put it also on top, because I think it is maybe the most relevant for many of you, is for SMEs. So SMEs can receive out of those regional programs funds for production, for innovation, for digitization. I assume this will be very similar to the programs for SMEs that we also had during the current period, when companies could receive under the regular budget up to 1 million euro for several projects. We will see. This is still under discussion. There will be funds for smart cities, so which means city halls can then invest into interesting projects and receive funds from here. Energy efficiency in public and private buildings, that's, as I said before, a huge topic. This is a program that worked relatively well also in the last period, and also here I assume that it will be more or less taken over without too many changes. Mobility is the issue here. This means especially public mobility. This means buses, trams, etc. Improvements of schools and universities, and several types of tourism projects. So this is the plan. All these projects actually and programs are still under discussion, so it's not yet final, but some of them, reading them, I've seen that are quite detailed already. Some are still a little bit more general, so it will still take very well into 2021, I would say, until we will have the final version and the programs themselves can actually be defined. Transport, also a huge chapter. Of course, funds, because this was also one of the priorities that I mentioned already for the European Union, funds will be spent again for TEN-T corridors, highways, as well as railroad infrastructure. Also rolling stock, I see here, even though it was before on the list of exclusions, but there are some specific cases where it is possible to receive funds also for rolling stock, and the ports of the Danube. And also an important aspect that has not been looked at too well and too much in the past are the multimodal terminals. And here, as it seems now, only private investors will be eligible, and currently there's foreseen a budget of 85 million euro for this area. And another 100 million euro will be spent for road safety. This means some improvements and investments in specific sites. Sustainable development, another very important area for Romania. First of all, you will see here 600 million euro that will be spent or can be spent for energy efficiency measures in SMEs and large companies. So here you come with the large companies, and for district heating. What does this mean, energy efficiency measures for companies? Well, I think mostly we will be talking about equipment that will be replaced by more modern, more energy efficient equipment, for instance. But also here we still have to wait for more definitions. And also here will be a big amount of money, 2.5 billion euro for drinking water and wastewater systems. Many of these projects are under development already since 2007, and one by one they're getting finished. And some other areas like recycling, disaster prevention, biodiversity, etc. Smart growth, digitization, and financial instruments, another chapter, very important. In the past, it was possible to receive funds for this kind of programs, but there will be a lot more money available now. So any kind of research and development activities for SMEs and again for large companies. They have also named already 4 strategic research projects, one for hydrogen, one for artificial intelligence, one for nanotechnology, and one for an international research project in the Danube Delta, but there's also e-government, etc. Health, this is a program that was actually not triggered by the COVID crisis, but it was planned already last year that it should be part of the EU programs for Romania. So this means, of course, construction of regional hospitals. Some of this project have started already, but they need to be continued because the budget they had for this current period were not sufficient. Improvements, investments into existing hospitals, and very important also here, the digitization of the medical system, which is still in quite a very bad shape in Romania. So everything is happening still on paper. And there is a huge requirement of additional investments in this area. A completely new chapter is inclusion and social dignity. This will provide funds to public authorities, partly also to ONGs. This means that, for instance, projects for disadvantaged groups of society, for youth employment, but also training for caregivers, for people working with persons in more difficult life situations. And then there's the chapter of education and employment, basically a continuation of the program that we had also during the last years, with very similar targets. So you see again here vocational training and retraining for new job requirements. Also, of course, again in combination and related to the digitalization. Social enterprises, and I think very important also for many of international companies, there will for the first time be EU funds also for dual education. There have been many or several, let's say, lighthouse projects already in the past years by large companies and also in cooperation with the Austrian community and also the German community for dual education projects according to similar like in the Austrian or German legislation. This is now apparently more broadly accepted by the Romanian politicians, and there will be funds for this kind of projects in the future. So this was the overview of the period 2021-27. So now let's just quickly touch some of the programs where you still can receive EU funds during the current period 2014-2020. First of all, until the end of November, so very quickly, very short time, it is still possible to receive EU funds for investments of SMEs. This is a little bit an unusual program because just look how much money has to be spent. Each project has to absorb at least 1.5 million euro EU funds. Now, given the fact that we have between 45 to 70% maximum funding quota of the projects, this means that the project has to have a volume of at least 2.5 million euro in the best case, but it could even be more than 3 million euro just to be eligible, which is of course a lot of money for SMEs, especially in these times when the co-financing is not so easy and banks are very restrictive regarding financing new projects. We will see how many projects will actually be submitted, but the budget with 150 million euros is not huge either. For smaller investments of SMEs, there is a program that is going to start within the next weeks. The date has actually not been communicated. This program is thought for companies that want to receive between 50,000 and 200,000 euro EU funds. So for relatively small investments, there's quite a lot of money available. So there are more than 500 million euro is the actual budget number. Most likely it will start, I would say, in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Hopefully this means that it will be possible to submit projects for 30 days. That's what it was announced, which means that approximately until mid of December it will be possible to submit applications. In theory, companies can receive up to 85% EU funds for the projects, but if they ask for 85% at the current status of the evaluation criteria, this means that they will lose a lot of points in the evaluation. So our recommendation is to all our clients with whom we are preparing this kind of projects to ask for less funds and to receive more points in the evaluation, and then to have also higher chances to receive the actual funding. There is another program that was announced for SMEs where it is not yet clear if it will still start this year or next year. This is a program for EU funds for digital investments of SMEs. In this case, only SMEs that are not IT companies by themselves, but SMEs that are doing anything except IT, but need some investments in their CRM, ERP systems, in RPA or whatever. So they can receive between 35,000 and 100,000 euro EU funds, 90%. This is what we have been seen until now. So a very high quota of EU funds in relation to the project value. 100 million euro is the entire budget, and we will see how quickly it will be possible to start this program. And then we have also, of course, national programs, not only programs with EU funds. And now I come back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier. If you have a large company in Romania or you're working for a large company in Romania and you plan some investments, there are two programs that I think are very attractive for you. Both of them are actually administered by the Romanian Ministry of Finance. The first one is more focused on investments. The second one that I will present in a minute from now is more focused on employing people. So this more investment-focused program means that all kinds of investment projects, SMEs and large companies that are higher than 1 million euro are eligible for this kind of program. With, of course, a lot of many more conditions that have to be fulfilled. The good point is that this program is running until the end of 2023, so there is no hurry in this case, unlike the EU-funded programs I presented before. It is possible anytime until 2023 to submit projects for this program. How much can you receive? That's a little bit complicated to calculate. There are two limits. The first limit is depending on the region, you can receive not more than 35 or in most of the country 50% of the investment value. But there is a second criterion. This criteria is usually the one that is dominant, that is more powerful. And this means you can never receive more EU funds than the total amount of all social security payments and taxes that you will pay as a result of your investment during the next 5 years. Yeah. Bit complicated as it sounds, but you have to look at it from the other side. It means basically you receive the funds now and you pay them back via social security payments and taxes within the next 5 years. Eligible construction and equipment mostly. The other second program is for companies that hire more than 100 employees in a new project. This is mostly interesting for companies that have a relatively low investment value but are going to hire a lot of people. Also running until the end of 23. And here you can receive all salary costs for the newly employed people within 3 years after the actual start of the investment. And you will get paid for this cost of these employees for 24 months of each. Also sounds a bit complicated, but in practice actually not so complicated to calculate. One last program, and then we are through. Another program from national funds that was announced some time ago, and it should still start in November this year. I think also here we don't have a clear starting date yet. This is special for SMEs and for HoReCa. And eligible are photovoltaic panels and electric charging stations. There are some limits. First of all, a company cannot receive more than 100,000 euro funds for this kind of projects. And the panels must not produce more than 100 kilowatts hour. And the charging stations, there is a restriction of 22 kilowatts. It's not yet sure. I wrote here maximum, could also be minimum. This is not yet clear from the documents we have received until now. Hopefully it's minimum because 22 kilowatts is not very much. So this is a program that we assume will also start still in the coming weeks. Yeah, whenever you have questions, please do not hesitate. I have to look if we have received a few questions already. Let me just see. So I see there's a question, what is actually happening if Romania cannot use all the EU funds from the current period until the end of 2023? But very simple, the money will be lost, unfortunately. There is no possibility that this red line, if you remember, of EU funds that is still unused from the period 2014 to 2020 can still be prolonged into the next period.
All right, yeah, dear viewers, lieber Johannes, I will stay now on the side. I wear the mask. I hope that everybody hears me pretty clear in the microphone right now. But we're going to take a few questions in right now, as we had some very general questions which I would like to pose to you. And after those general questions, we will go on with my presentation about funding programs, subsidy programs that we have as the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber, Wirtschaftskammer Österreich. And then after my presentation, we will go for one more round of questions, of Q&A. Yeah, one question was that came in very early and maybe has been already answered partially is, when will the new subsidies all come up? Will they all come up in the beginning of the period, or will they come up step by step?
Yeah, well, as I said, this is still a little bit unclear. So basically, the EU funds from this Next Generation EU, this recovery fund, these funds should be used in the very first years of this period, 21-27. It depends very much, of course, how quickly the Romanian government, whichever it will be after the elections, will be really able to present the final versions of the programs and will have operational programs. If you're looking at the period 21-27 and the entire regular budget, it depended very much also in the last period. So if I'm remembering the period 2014-2020, for some of the programs, it was possible to submit projects for the first time in 2017, so very late actually. So hopefully this will be a little bit faster, but it is, let's say, maybe too early to tell. We will know a little bit more about this, let's say maybe in 6 months' time, when we have seen how well the Romanians have developed their programs in further detail.
All right, the second question that came in, and I think this question is already completely answered by you, is what happens with all the subsidies and all the funded funds that are not being called off from the current period or the period that is ending right now?
Exactly, yeah. So as I said before, this money would be definitely lost, unfortunately.
Yeah. And the third question that we take in right now, and afterwards I'm going to do my presentation again. Third question is, that there are certain concerns out there that the Romanian government is going to implement it in a way that the funds are not going to be completely accessible. And will you see with the new government a completely different approach, or do you already see a completely different approach? And what about institutional competence and capacities in that respect?
Yes. So first of all, yes, we do see a different approach already. So the current government is, let's say, a lot more open to discussion with the private economy and with private stakeholders regarding what the funds should be used for. So this means that we have a much better dialogue with the government and especially with the Ministry of EU Funds in this case than we had in the years before that. But of course, you have seen the figures and you have seen how big the mountain of funds is that is coming. It is, of course, a very relevant concern whether Romania will actually use this money, first of all, quickly enough, and it will have the capacity also to construct it. I mean, just let's think of construction companies. They are quite busy at the moment already. And a large part of this budget that is going to come in the next years will actually be a budget that is being used for construction. So this means also the construction companies should receive, if you ask me personally, additional funds to invest into more equipment, etc., just to be able to build all these things that can be built with EU funds in the coming years.
All right, thank you very much, Johannes. For now, we're going to go for a second Q&A session after my presentation, and we're going to change place here right now. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I might go on now, or I will go on right now with our Internationalisierungsoffensive, Go International, which is a program by the Ministry of Economy and Digitalization and the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber, and especially us, Advantage Austria. As this kind of program is completely and clearly geared by all the regulations that are behind to the Austrian companies coming new into the market, you allow me now to switch over to German language for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to switch back to English language. Stay with us. We're going to go for another Q&A session. Johannes Becker is going to talk to you as well. But those regulations are clearly for Austrian companies coming new into the market. So all the subsidiaries that are already here will not be eligible for those funds. So please allow me to speak for about 5-10 minutes in German language. Ja, es geht darum, dass diese Internationalisierungsoffensive Go International eine gemeinsame Initiative ist von dem Bundesministerium für Digitalisierung und Wirtschaftsstandort und der Wirtschaftskammer Österreich. Diese Internationalisierungsoffensive wurde schon 2003 gestartet. Das ist inzwischen in der 6. Periode, die bis März 2021 läuft. Und ich präsentiere ganz kurz Programme, die bis März 2021 abgeschlossen werden müssen. Und in Verhandlung ist aber derzeit die Internationalisierungsoffensive 7, die 7. Auflage. Und diese ist dann geplant ab April 2021. Die Verhandlungen laufen sehr gut. Diese Internationalisierungsoffensive wird kommen. Und wir werden Sie so früh wie möglich über die Programme dahinter und alle die Bewerbungsunterlagen und so weiter informieren. Ja, die Abwicklung ist exklusiv über die Außenwirtschaft Austria. Und diese Abwicklung über die Außenwirtschaft Austria funktioniert natürlich über unsere Zentrale in Wien, aber auch über alle Außenwirtschaftsbüros in den Landeskammern, die wir haben. und Sie können natürlich auch alle Außenwirtschaftscenter direkt ansprechen. Die Struktur der IO6 derzeit ist, es gibt 3 Cluster von Programmen, die wir haben. Die einen sind zur Standortsicherung, das heißt den Wirtschaftsstandort absichern, Unternehmen zum Export motivieren, also sprich Neuexporteure, das war das, was ich gemeint habe mit New to Market, bei der Gewinnung von Fachkräften zu unterstützen und auch Österreich als exzellenten Wirtschaftspartner und vor allem verlässlichen Wirtschaftspartner zu positionieren. Das zweite Cluster sind Wachstumsmärkte und Zukunftsbranchen. Und diese Wachstumsmärkte und Zukunftsbranchen sollen eben bereits exportierende Unternehmen in neue Märkte geführt werden, also wieder dieses New to Market, das bei uns immer vorkommt. Und soll auch in Richtung Projektgeschäft gehen mit internationalen Finanzierungsinstitutionen. Ja, und der dritte große Cluster, den wir haben, ist Digitalisierung, Innovation und Technologie. Und dort sollen die Potenziale der digitalen Internationalisierung erschlossen werden, Innovationswissen vermittelt werden, Innovationspartner gefunden werden und Technologien international vermarktet werden. Ein wichtiger Punkt ist, dass dies alles Direktförderungen sind. Das heißt, Sie bekommen direkte finanzielle Unterstützung für Ihre Exportaktivitäten und dass die weiteren Maßnahmen sozusagen auch kostengünstige Teilnahme an Veranstaltungen sind, wie Wirtschaftsmissionen, Marktsondierungsreisen oder auch ähnliche Veranstaltungen. Ein ganz wichtiger Punkt ist, dass die meisten dieser Programme nur bis zum März 2021 laufen oder alle diese Programme, die ich jetzt präsentiere am Anfang, nur bis 2021 laufen, 31. März. Das bedeutet in jedem Fall, die Antragstellung muss bis 31. März 2021 gemacht sein. Die Auszahlung und die Kosten, die anfallen dafür, für diesen Antrag, der bis 31. März 2021 gestellt wurde, können auch nachher anfallen und werden auch nachher abgegolten. Ja, es gibt eine Webseite, die eben go-international.at ist und auf dieser Website finden Sie alle Informationen und Sie finden auch alle Kontakte, die Sie benötigen, um Informationen zu den Programmen zu bekommen und wie Sie dabei sind. Ja, bei den Direktförderungen, und das sind die wir jetzt noch forcieren, weil wir glauben, dass die derzeit in der Covid-Krise auch sehr stark sozusagen zu einem Wachstum international beitragen können, sind der Internationalisierungscheck. Der sieht einen Zuschuss von bis zu 50% direkten Markteintrittskosten vor, einen Digitalisierungscheck, der auch einen Zuschuss von bis zu 50% der Kosten ihrer Digitalisierungsmaßnahmen international natürlich vorsieht, und der Projektchef. Und da geht es in erster Linie um Beratungskosten, auch im Zusammenhang mit Programmen und Projekten von internationalen Finanzierungsinstitutionen. Der Prozess der Direktförderungen ist relativ kompliziert. Wie ich schon erwähnt habe, diese Präsentation wird an Sie ausgesandt. Auch diese Prozesse und alles weitere sind auf unserer Website. Ich werde daher nicht im Detail eingehen, aber Sie können sehen, wie funktioniert der Prozess. Ganz wichtig, Direktförderungen, New to Market. Warum spreche ich jetzt Deutsch? Weil alle Firmen, die schon hier sind, keinen Anspruch eigentlich haben auf diese Fördermöglichkeiten. New to Market bedeutet, dass sie neu in einen Markt eintreten. Das bedeutet, dass sie in den letzten Jahren keine regelmäßigen Lieferungen in diesem Markt hatten und kein Projekt zum Beispiel in diesem Markt abgeschlossen haben. Sie bauen eben ein neues Netzwerk auf, neue Vertriebspartner. Es ist ein neuer Markt für Sie. New to Market ist für alle diese Programme eine Voraussetzung. Beim Internationalisierungscheck geht es eben darum, Sie sehen, wer ist sozusagen berechtigt, diesen Internationalisierungscheck zu bekommen. Sind bis zu 50% der Kofinanzierung. Innerhalb Europas sind es maximal 5.000 Euro, die wir bezahlen. Maximal 50% Ihrer Kosten, die Sie haben. Wie gesagt, Antragstellung bis 31. März 2021. Und neben New to Market gibt es hier auch noch das Kriterium, eine substanzielle Wertschöpfung in Österreich muss gegeben sein, um berechtigt zu sein, in diesem Programm teilzunehmen. Welche Kosten werden getragen? Es geht hier um Marketingkosten, Veranstaltungskosten, Digitalisierungskosten, Reisekosten, die allerdings begrenzt sind, und Beratungsleistungen, die Sie haben in diesem Bereich. Ja, Beratungskosten, Sie sehen eben, welche Beratungskosten werden getragen. Wie gesagt, um auch ein bisschen abzukürzen hier, diese Folien bekommen Sie im Anschluss an das Webinar und können alles noch nachlesen, beziehungsweise stehen wir auch alle zu Ihrer Beratung zur Verfügung. Der Internationalisierungscheck gibt es eine Technologie- und einen Nachhaltigkeitsbonus. Technologiebonus, wie Sie sehen, sind für Innovationen, müssen auch sozusagen Patent- oder Gebrauchsmusteranmeldungen haben innerhalb der letzten Zeit und bekommen dann eine eigene Fördermöglichkeit. Der Nachhaltigkeitsbonus ist etwas, das wir auch jetzt eingeführt haben und hier gibt es dann etwas höhere Fördermöglichkeiten, die Sie haben. Beim Digitalisierungscheck, der zweiten Kategorie, die wir hier haben, ist es für eben auch alle KMUs, Mitglieder der Wirtschaftskammern und gleichgestellte, berechtigte Ziviltechniker, Bildungsinstitutionen zum Beispiel. Da bekommen Sie eine Kofinanzierung von bis zu 50% des digitalen Auslandsauftrittes. Alle externen Kosten, die Sie mit dieser zielbezogenen Online-Marketing, Website-Anpassung und so weiter Aktion haben. Der maximale Auszahlungsbetrag sind 7.500 €. Das bedeutet, die Kosten, die maximalen, die gefördert werden, sind 15.000 €, davon 50%, Direktauszahlung 7.500 €. Wieder substanzielle Wertschöpfung und New-to-Market müssen in Österreich gegeben sein und die der Zeitpunkt der Antragstellung muss bis 31.03.2021 abgeschlossen sein. Wir sehen hier ein paar Beispiele der förderfähigen externen Kosten. Es gibt eben Suchmaschinenoptimierungen, es gibt eben Adaptierungen des zum Beispiel Webshops auf das Zielland, auf das neue Zielland, sprich eine sprachliche Adaptierung, die Sie haben, rechtliche Hintergrundadaptierungen und so weiter. Und ja, Internetgütesiegel, die Sie bekommen im Ausland und ähnliches oder auch arbeiten im Social-Media-Bereich, wie zum Beispiel mit Influencern. Das sind externe förderbare Kosten für diesen Digitalisierungscheck. Ja, und der dritte Bereich, das ist der Projektcheck. Der Projektcheck, da geht es eben, wie gesagt, um die Kofinanzierung von Projekten mit dem Ziel, neue Exportmärkte zu erschließen, immer New-to-Market und substanzielle Wertschöpfung in Österreich notwendig. Und es geht hier eben mit unterschiedlichen Projektkategorien, unterschiedliche Förderhöhen. Allerdings sind diese auch mit 5.000 bis 15.000 € begrenzt und die Antragstellung muss ebenso bis 31.03.2021 abgeschlossen sein. Das heißt, das Projekt, die Durchführung kann bei allen 3 Schecks, die ausbezahlt werden, kann die Durchführung auch nach dem 31.03.2021 stattfinden. Auch die Kosten können danach anfallen und die Auszahlung findet danach statt. Die Antragstellung muss aber bis 31. März 2021 durchgeführt werden. Ja. Förderbare externe Kosten sind hier auch wieder Beratungskosten, Informationskosten, Weiterbildung, Reisekosten, diverse Veranstaltungen und ähnliches. Hinweise, wir haben dann in der Präsentation, die Sie bekommen im Anschluss, auch die Ansprechpartner in den Landeskammern und Sie können jederzeit die Landeskammern ansprechen, können natürlich auch jederzeit uns ansprechen an den Außenwirtschaftszentren oder meine Kollegen in der Zentrale in Wien. Ja, in dem Sinne, nachdem wir noch einige Fragen haben, ich habe auch vorher schon gesehen, dass noch relativ viele Fragen hereingekommen sind. Wir haben auch von der Teilnehmeranzahl ein sehr, sehr großes Webinar heute. Darf ich den Johannes Becker wieder hier zu mir auf die Bühne bitten? Ich werde mich wieder auf die Seite begeben und darf aus der Seite heraus moderieren. Ja, von den Fragen her, Johannes, es gibt eine Frage für einen spezifischen Projektbereich, der eigentlich für uns sehr, sehr interessant ist. Well, maybe let me switch over to English. The question is in English. Sorry for that. Let's switch over to English again. There's a question regarding a sector that is also very interesting for us as also in companies because technologically we're really good in that and we already have projects running like waste to energy projects and waste to gas and yeah, similar projects. Is there kind of, for the residual waste treatment, does it also include waste to energy projects? Does it include waste to gas projects? Is there special funding for those projects? And is there also for the sector or the segment of district heating funding available, or will there be funding available within the next few years? Johannes?
Yeah, thank you. But basically, at the moment, these details have not yet been defined very clearly. So this means question waste to energy, will it be eligible or not? We have to see. In the past, in Romania, it was not eligible, but it would be logical because basically also waste is considered by the European Union as kind of biomass. If we're talking about biological residues, we have to see simply what is going to happen. Central district heating, of course, I mentioned it already, it will be possible to receive funds, but of course these are public funds. So all the central district heatings in Romania are actually operated by public authorities or by companies that are owned by public authorities. As I said, this is a huge necessity in Romania for receiving funds for the next period.
Yeah, there's another question which is about the tourism sector. Everybody says, and we also say it since years, that the tourism sector is one of the sectors that could really profit in Romania out of those fundings. There's a lot going on right now, also in kind of green tourism, ecological tourism. Do you see certain programs coming up dedicated especially for the tourism sector?
Yes, yeah, I assume it will be possible to receive more funds for tourism than in the past, because in the past period it was possible to receive funds only for small bed and breakfast units within an agricultural unit, so agrotourism basically. Yeah, this was of course not very interesting for many investors who had investments into hotels or large facilities. But it would be logical to make this kind of funds available again for large facilities like hotels.
All right, and Stefan, could you maybe define the question number 10 a bit better from the original question? I do not really understand what is meant there. I will go back to question number 9. Is there already existing a program for supporting the agricultural sector for the new period?
This is currently being worked at. So first drafts are being currently prepared, but this will still take a little while. Also because the common agricultural policy from the European Union has not yet been defined finally. So we have to wait until it is clear from the perspective of the European Union, from the European Commission and from the member countries, what they actually want to fund and in which direction finally the common agricultural policy will move. We have this concept from fork to plate, I think it's not mistaken. So this is still work in progress, but I assume within a few months we will know it.
All right, and now the last question that I see on my screen here is with reference to the fundings. Where can our viewers find the exact criteria for the definition of SMEs and large companies?
Mm-hmm. Well, the entire definition is quite complicated. It's a huge document from the European Commission. If you want, if you have your email address, we can send it to you. But if you have a specific case, just come to us, and it does take only a few hours to actually come forward with a response, even in case of a very complicated group, if it can be considered an SME or not. And as I said before, the definition itself is a little bit in parts in the gray area, especially when we're talking about physical persons who are shareholders of companies. And it's sometimes a little bit difficult to clarify with 100% certainty if a company is an SME or not. But let's say in 95% of all cases, it is quite straightforward.
All right, and now a question to you, which comes from one of our viewers in the webinar, which is of kind of general nature, but you might be able to answer it as well. In the sector of automation, all the companies in Romania say right now that all the investments are on hold. Do you see it that way also in the other sectors? Are the investments overall on hold, or is the investment sector in Romania developing pretty well?
Well, I would say, just from my perspective, and as we see as TPA, the situation in discussions with our clients, they were on hold, let's say, from March to August. Yeah, so from March to August, there was really nothing happening regarding new investments, also regarding automation, because we're also making automation projects for our clients. But since September, I see that many of the projects that we have been discussing in the earlier parts of this year, in the first months or last year, are suddenly coming back to us and now say, now we want to invest in Romania. And these are not only small projects. So we're also discussing projects of investments of 50 million euro or something like this. So we have the impression that there's a lot more optimism now in Romania with investors, local investors and foreign investors, than it was a few months ago.
All right, Johannes, as you are Austrian, you have been here for 25 years in Romania by now and working for 20 years as a kind of consultant in all the funding, European Union fundings and national funding programs. There's a question which also refers a bit back to Austria. In Austria, we have an organization which is called the FFG, the Forschungsförderungsgesellschaft, which is more or less the society for research funding for kind of basic research or applied research, and helps in that way. Is there some kind of similar institution in Romania like the FFG in Austria, or are there possibilities for fundings in that area?
Yeah, well, I would be happy if we could have something like the FFG also in Romania, because I had also some projects in the past with the FFG in Austria, and it was really a pleasure to work with them. In Romania, no, we do not have this. Basically, there are not too many national programs for the research area anyway. So research funds in Romania mostly refer to EU funds for research and development. I have to also say honestly that in the period 2014-2020, these programs for research and development did not work very well. So there were huge delays sometimes until the projects were actually approved, and especially in research and development where you have to move very quickly because you also have competitors, this is not a good starting point. But we have received promises that this will be sped up in the future, and I'm, as always, I have to be optimistic that this is going a lot better starting from next year.
All right, Johannes Becker from TPA Romania, partner and consultant for European Union and national programs. Thank you very much for being here with us today, and we might switch the place in front of the camera again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Here, we'll send out your contact details, so you will be available, obviously, for all the viewers of the webinar that we have today, the participants of the webinar. We're going to give them your contact details, and Johannes Becker will be readily available for you.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today for this interesting topic. It's the new funding period that comes up. And as we have seen from Johannes Becker, in this new funding period, we already have a lot of programs that will open up. We also spoke a bit about the funding programs that we have as Advantage Austria, as the Außenwirtschaft Austria, in the Go International Internationalisierungsoffensive. If you have any questions, please feel free to turn to us anytime. So we hope that we're all doing good business here together. We are very optimistic. We see in the, actually Ludwig Orban, the Prime Minister, gave yesterday an interview where he said that the investment sector is doing really well in Romania right now. Romania, comparative to other European Union countries, is doing very well. So we see those projects going on. What we hear from our Austrian construction companies, for instance, is that the projects are in full swing. Performance of construction sites is above 90%, was always above 90-95%. And right now running very well. There's a lot of projects coming out. So we're very optimistic about 2020, and let's hope that 2020 is 2021 is gonna be economically a good year for us, but not only for us, also for the government with the budget revenues. With this, I would like to close. If there are any questions also concerning the immigration rules from Austria to Romania or from Romania to Austria, feel free to contact us anytime, by phone, by email. We're always gonna be there. And yeah, we're all with you in Vienna. Hope that everything gets better now. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Thank you very much for being with us. Have a nice day. Goodbye.